Today is quite exciting because this is my first workshop away from home. I'm not in Freiburg, southwest Germany. I am in Forcalquier, southeast of France, in the beautiful Provence. And as I am talking to you, I'm seeing absolutely gorgeous olive trees. But to be honest, the weather is not good, so not quite what fits in the picture. But yeah, Forcalquier, you know, is actually where I arrived when I was 8 years old. This is where the family house still is, where my father still lives. And so many souvenirs are attached to it, including, as you can guess, with the Bach suites. And not only the suites, this is, Forcalquier is where I heard for the first time in a very intense and regular manner Bach cantatas, because my parents were listening to it all the time at home. And this is where I played my first notes on the cello. I had my first lessons when I was 9 years old. And of course, as you can guess, this is where I played my first cello suites, Bach Cello Suites notes in this place in Forcalquier. Unfortunately, I'm not exactly in that house because that house is beautifully set in the countryside, far away from everything, but therefore the Wi-Fi is quite weak and unreliable. And therefore, I'm very grateful that our friends welcomed me, Bertrand and Pascal. I am in their home to do this workshop, and they are sitting just behind the camera here. So thank you, Bertrand and Pascal, for welcoming me here. Our guest in about 15 to 20 minutes will be such a charismatic figure, so I'm very excited. It's Lambert Wilson, the actor that you all know that needs no presentation, and I am a great fan, so I'm very grateful that he accepted to be on this show. Before we go to the Courante, which anyway is a very short movement, and also where, how can I say, it's a movement that is like, you know, like a horse going through the setting in a very, like a cavalcade, and it is not something where there is a lot to analyze harmonically or even motivically. It's more about the energy of it. So therefore we won't need so much time for it. And for that reason, I would like to use the little extra time we have to talk about some questions, of course, that you sent me. And if possible, I will see how efficient I manage to be. I want to talk about phrasing, and I want to talk about memory, because you sent me very interesting questions about these two things. About the phrasing, here are two questions that I will read for you. One is from Simon, and he's asking, I see how you can play with microphrases or microphrases with a feeling of verticality, but it still feels like it belongs to a larger phrase. Do you have a method of achieving this? This is from Simon. And the other question is from Rio Usami, who says, I am a violinist living in America. I was wondering if you could discuss how to develop sound resonance and the sense of ending a phrase. I particularly love when the sound has a lot of ring and the ends of phrases are tasteful with the right amount of taper. You mentioned the 5-1 exercise. I will explain later for those of you who were not on this show. The 5-1 exercise in Pablo's video. And I understood that you think of phrase endings as a single gesture of an exhaling. I would really appreciate if you could share your thoughts on making a sound more resonant and how to end a phrase beautifully. So what Rio was referring to is that between the last episode and this episode, I recorded with Pablo Ferrandez an episode for his series Talking Cello, wonderful series that I highly recommend, with a lot of very interesting guests. And we talked about some things, including about, about the breathing in the playing, basically. And I would say, if you want to talk about phrasing in Bach, but probably in any music, it's all about breathing. And for this, I would encourage you to look at last week's episode when Emmanuel Pahu as a flautist, of course, insisted on this and put the finger right on it, and he said, actually, basically, music making is all about breathing. It's all about this very first gesture we make when we are born. You know, we are born, we come out of our mother, and the first thing we do is take air, and then starts this movement that will be with us until our very last breath. And this, I think, is a key to any kind of phrasing in music. And this is what we have to find as cellists in our bow arm, basically. So I will come back to Rio's question, but now Simon's question about the microphrases and the larger phrase. Basically, my answer to Simon is actually quite simple, and then I will develop. It's you don't, if you think longer phrases, don't think that because you want to make a longer phrase, you have to sort of erase or make less important the small phrases. You need the small elements to build the larger elements. Like we said in the very first episode, like Bach does, you know, he takes small elements and then he constructs big elements. And it's the same for us. And I was giving a lesson to my dear student Jewu this morning, and he had exactly the same question. He said, how, he said, if you start playing really like a whole suite, do you still like do all these little elements, or do you try to just go in one breath from the beginning to the end? Well, I really think that the more you acknowledge the very first element when you start a movement, the more you acknowledge it, the more life you give to it and the breathing, the better you will then be able to construct the larger element. I will go shortly back to the Allemande from the second suite and show you how this first phrase was. If you want to construct your movement, you first have to really acknowledge this first phrase or element of phrase, and to really finish it and give it its full shape. So that was about the question for Simon. And the question of Rio about the ring. So it's about the sound. We will have many chances to talk about this. I've already mentioned it. But basically, this breathing that we want to bring, the translation in the bow technique is that sometimes you have to dig in the sound, and then in between, did you see I leaned in the sound here, and then here again, and in between I was like in levitation, like, you know, not anymore staying in the ground. And this is very important, because this is what my teacher Tim Eddy, who will be one of my guests in a future episode, calls the third dimension, this dimension, the vertical one. And this is where also your knowledge of harmony is very important. Where is an important chord? D minor. And then I will swing until the next important chord. That was the next one, dominant. So we have basically 1, 2, 3, 5 chords all together to build this little first phrase. And as you can see, between these chords, there is hierarchy. There are the chords where we are more in the sound, and the chords where we release more. So that's why I insisted also in past episode, speak your music, sing it, dancing, because when you do that, I think the breathing and the natural shape of the music comes much more easily, and then it's only about translating it into your bow technique. But I think the first thing is really that you have this in your head, this imagination, this curb of the sound. And when you really develop that a lot, you will not anymore allow yourself to just stay to play linear, which is then has a lack of breathing. I think, well, no, I did speak too much, so I will speak about this wonderful question by Guido about memory. Guido from Buenos Aires, who is a Baroque and tango cellist. I already mentioned in a past episode his question, but it's a nice and very interesting question about memory, about the different types of memory, where he's talking about how basically in order to really engrave things when we play by memory, the most important, and that's his question, isn't the most important that we are really, when we learn the piece, that we are excited by everything, by the little details, by the shape of the phrase, by the rhythm, and then this will allow us to really engrave the music in very low level. Nevertheless, now that I touched the question, and I will come back to it in a future episode, it is interesting for the movement of the day, the Courante, because this Courante of the second suite is a very fast cavalcade, as I said, and that's why I called this episode, after a film by Godard, à bout de souffle. Whoops, sorry, I should have practiced before the show, but I apologize. So basically what we have in this movement is mainly 16th notes that just go all the time, with a few exceptions, a few chords, and so it's called, in this case, a quasi moto perpetuum, and this constant drive of the 16th note gives this very running quality to it. And the reason I wanted to go from there to this Courante about the memory is that all these very fast things we have to do, where there is a lot happening, left, right, change of strings, a lot of agility. In the moment of playing, you cannot, with your mind, think every little gesture. So anyway, there is a type of extremely deep memory, which is what Philippe Lahm, football player, I don't know if you like football, I do, I like to watch it sometimes, and he was referring to it, that the football players, they have to practice for hours to learn induced reflexes, to have, so that these fast movements are recorded really, really deep in your brain, so that in the moment you need it, you just need to trigger, and then it's happening by itself. And this is one part of the memory process that we have to use, but it cannot be the only one, and this I will develop in a later episode. Now, there are just a few details, 3 or 4 little places I want to show in this Courante, to mention to you specifically. The first thing is this chord that comes on the second bar. So, we cellists face a problem here, because the chords, by nature, they have to be arpeggiated from the bottom to the top note. Some people play from above, and what Anna Belsma taught me is that this is really against the nature of gravity, and this you could do in a 20th century piece, but not in a Baroque piece. And on the contrary, he was suggesting that because then the melody goes on after this chord, not from the top note, but it goes from the bottom note. So you have to be like a magician, like in Catch Me If You Can or something. You have to do a trick so that once you have really developed the sound of your chord, come back very discreetly, without anybody hearing it, to your C sharp, to your bottom note, so that then you are ready to go on So I don't know how with this mean of communication at distance you can perceive it, but the idea is that we don't have that we don't hear aha he's going up and down, because this is also not very nice, but you really create a shock and then you come back within this shock to the bottom note. So really like creating an illusion, like the magician who does this with one hand and you don't see that with the other hand he's hiding a card or doing a trick. This is the first thing I wanted to mention. The next thing is just in the next phrase. Many cellists, and I did at least for many, many years, I tended to totally ignore the next downbeat. And I would really play this B flat like if it was a downbeat. And I think this is a mistake. I think it's important for you because we are very early in the piece. So we have this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and we cannot lose it already in the second bar. It's not possible. So that means 3, 1. I encourage you to really feel what's happening in the bass there, which is low, where there is actually a bass which is active on the downbeat. That said, the next thing actually is, well, no, Bach again, as we have mentioned before, he twice in this piece brings a walking bass, a moment where the bass gets very active towards the end of each part, of part A. Yeah, so when you hear this bass, yes, and I think actually this movement doesn't need much more than that. Just make sure that in the sound production that these small notes are produced either a little bit with the forearm, but mainly also with the fingers, because if you produce them too much with the whole arm, then you will have a problem of coordination and of quality of sound. And now it is my utmost pleasure to welcome Lambert Wilson. Dear Lambert, have you arrived? Are you there? I'm putting on my headphones so I can hear you. Do we have Lambert on the line? I will change the angle of this. Hello, hello. Or maybe Eric can give me some information. Whether, yes, I see you, dear Lambert. Hello, dear Lambert. Can you hear me? Lambert just has to touch his audio button so we can hear him. Lambert, tu m'entends? He cannot hear me, and we cannot hear you, dear Lambert. So, we see you. Oui.
Ouais. Oui.
Lambert, bonjour. Merci d'être là.
Mais merci de me recevoir.
Ouais, c'est merveilleux parce que so Lambert, we have met in a festival in Salon, in south of France, where we did Carnaval des Animaux together, and I remember how wonderful it was to see how each of your interventions was relating to the music so much, and anyway, everybody out there has seen how much music, how huge a role music plays in your life. So, but within this, what are the cello suites for you? How do you see them? Do you listen to them? Have you listened to them at some moments in your life? Do you have something, a souvenir attached to it?
Absolutely. I have said very often that if I had to choose a desert island record, it would be the cello suites, which is not an answer that I've heard mentioned by many people, because it's very austere as a choice to go on a desert island and listen to the cello suites. It so happens that I discovered them when I was a young man, because a friend of mine who is a cello player out of a very prestigious musical family in France, Renaud Fontana-Rosa, who is a cellist, played them, was working on them, and so this is how I discovered them. And I was listening to them all the time because he was very often playing them, and that's how I discovered them. And then I live with Bach, so I studied singing, and so Bach is very, very present in my life. I just brought you just to prove my point. My scores of the cantatas that I'm working on at the moment, Ich habe genug, and then the other one, number 56, Ich will den Kreuzstab gerne tragen. I live with Bach, and so they're very present in my life. Renaud Fontana-Rosa introduced me to his teacher. I mean, I listened to Tortelier when I discovered the suites. And so I discovered the suites really with Pablo Casas and Tortelier. And this is how they entered my life. And I just felt that it contained so much. In French, we have a word that's a little difficult to translate in English. What I find necessary in the suites is the fact that they do not contain any, although they are not religious, they contain no frivolous detail. Even if there are dances, they seem to be so pure and simple, not simple technically, clearly, essential. So I just figure that if I had to go on a desert island, this series of suites contained the whole of music. The rest was a detail, even Mozart, because in Mozart you have theater, you have entertainment, you have little details, anecdotes. Yes, that's the word, anecdotes. There are no anecdotes in Bach, in the suites. So, but then I have to say that because I have a melancholy nature, I tend to prefer the suites in minor tone. So I'm really crazy about number 2 and number 5. And because I'm extremely melancholy as well, I like the very slow movements, and so I'm crazy about the sarabande. So my hits of all times are the sarabande in number 2 and mostly sarabande in number 5, because there are no chords, and it's so incredibly pure. And so my feeling always goes to the minor suites. I mean, the suites in minor.
Yeah. So that's it's so interesting that you, as a singer, which is one of your many activities and professions in a way, or maybe it's one whole larger profession of singing and acting and everything. So we as what I'm talking about very often with my students is if you want to go into the Bach suite, don't listen to 10 recordings of the Bach suite. Listen to cantatas. Listen to the passions. Listen to the voice. So we need you. We need the voice. We need the singers to help us, to guide us into the
ironic
playing
because it's ironic because when you work on Bach and as a singer you get stuck technically because it's very the phrases are so incredibly long, and then you have you have to have this legato in the vocalizers, in the ornamentation. Then I do the exact same thing, except that I think of the cello. So therefore, my reference is the cello. So you might think, or tell your students, think of the singing. If I listen to the cello as a particular instrument outside of Bach, for me, it always implies singing, and so I hear the singing in Brahms. I hear the singing in all the great concertos that I've heard throughout the years. I always have the impression that the cello is the best instrument to express the human voice and to give the sensation. And I think the composers have loved the cello because of the singing. That it every time, and you hear the conductors always mentioning, that this is suddenly it's cantabile. You sing, and so you sing, and it's always the cello. Strangely enough, much more than the violin. So I listen to the Bach cantatas a lot, also because, again, there is no anecdote. It's pure. Okay, so the cantatas are religious, but for me, the suites are like a form of prayer. So it's a pagan music. They're dances. At the same time, you have this concentration that is so essential, so deep, that it becomes a form of prayer. So you can listen to it all the time, because it expresses our human lot, our experience as human beings. It expresses the pain of living, the hardship of living, the joy and the sadness. It's all about what it is to be a human being on this earth, if you believe in God or not, since the suites are not religious. But I always have the impression that he tells me about man, what it is to be a man and to go through life. So of course, then in the cantatas you have a text, and it's a religious text, and the two cantatas that I was mentioning, he says, I have enough of living, I want to be with God, and so it's a very specific message. Or I want to carry the cross, I want to be like Christ. This is a very specific message, but I feel the same intensity of faith in the suites, strangely enough. Also, what I admire and what I do not find in the vocal instrument is the polyphony. Polyphony in the cello is extraordinary. So suddenly you think you have an entire orchestra, you think, whoa, this sound is so multiple. I adore that.
Two thoughts that came to my mind as I was listening to you. First, about believing in God or not. Since you listened to Tortelier's recording, you probably know his famous quote about Bach, that Bach is the proof of the existence of God, in whom I don't believe. That was one thing.
I've thought a lot about. It's clever, and sometimes I get really irritated by that. Like it's too clever. I like the end. I like the end of it, because of course it would be too easy to think that Bach is a proof of God because he has written that music. Bach is the result of a culture. It's the result of several centuries of musical composition, culture, and clearly the man was supremely gifted. But at the same time, it was a job. He had to come up with all this music. He just had to do it. It's who nowadays, and I know contemporary composers, who is sponsored by the prince or even a theater or even a state to compose a cantata a week. This is like it's a job, and sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes it's he's reusing some bits that he knows work, but he is the quintessential man of his period, i.e. the Baroque period, there is a form of absolute balance in humanity. Okay, there were wars, there were plagues, it was very hard to live and life was short. But there seems to be at the beginning of the 17th century, which I find really interesting in my work as an actor in theater, in the French writers of the end of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century, a form of perfection, of absolute purity and balance, and that's why I don't need anything else. That's why I can content myself with just that. The rest is entertainment. The rest is, but I love music. I love Ravel, I love Rachmaninoff, I love so many composers, but this is my food.
Yes, nothing wrong about entertainment, absolutely. But coming back to what you said about the suites being, if I'm understood you right, like the essence of music, like there is not anymore all this everything around it. But that's interesting because what we've been talking about already in this 8 first episodes is that for us as a performer, and because quite a few cellists are sending questions and everything, for us as performers, in order to reach this essence, we have to go through what Bach took as a support for his language, which is the dancing, which is the swing of the music, so it's incarnation basically. So before we go to the essence and and as you said in the Sarabande of the Fifth Suite, where we reach almost the l'antimatière, something
Yeah,
like it's nothing. We have to, as performers, to go, okay, what is the incarnation on which Bach bases his language? He chose to write it on dances, except for the preludes, but otherwise he really wanted this incarnation.
I think that there is no form of universal art without the true knowledge of what it is to be a man, a peasant, to dance, to desire, to cook. If you are not connected with life, then there is something that will not be interesting eventually. You cannot just be connected to, the spirits or God. No. It's these are people who needed to eat, and they were festive, and you sense that, and you even sense that in the elevation of his cantatas. There is something in which the dance is never too far away. And then there's something, for instance, in Schabergenug, the last movement is very joyous, and there's something you can feel that the singer wants to dance. You have to. It's incredibly physical, and that's what it attracts me to Bach, as I am attracted to the works of theater writers who really understood human nature, like Molière, like Marivaux, like Shakespeare. And these people knew what it was to, forgive me, but to make love and to suffer, in their flesh. And it's in their music, the longing. That's what I find the most beautiful in the suites. The notion of longing, wanting something. And it's a dance, but at the same time, he expresses something very tragic of the human nature, tragic in our reality of not understanding whether there is a solution, whether there is a God, of going through the hard journey with it. And but it doesn't go without the joy. So my drama teachers always said to me, you have an action and you have a recovery. So if you have joy, then you must have the recovery, which will be dark, like you have light and darkness. This is music is so full of that. So it has everything. It has incredible darkness and pathos, and then it's just like vanished with the jig, which would be delightful and light and very pleasant.
Lambert, merci beaucoup. Thank you for giving us this.
All this nonsense about the Bach.
Not at all this perspective, and this is exactly what I was hoping, and this was even much more than what I was hoping. So,
okay.
Merci beaucoup, mille fois. Thank you so much. And next week, Friday, jazz singer Camille Berthaud will be my guest, and we will talk about the sarabande from the second suite, so one of Lambert's favorite movements. Yeah. So, see you next week, everybody, et merci beaucoup, Lambert.